Hey guys, a warning before we start tonight. This one involves a child, a 6-year-old. And if you're hoping for some redemptive arc where justice wins or humanity prevails, close the video now. Because what happened to Eugenia Martinez Vallejo is exactly what you think it is. And it's worse than that. Before we go further, like the video if you're genuinely invested in these stories. Subscribe if you want more. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me understand who's drawn to the darker corners of history and why. Get settled. This isn't a quick tale, and it's not going to sit well. 17th century, Madrid. A little girl stands in a palace room while Spain's most celebrated court painter studies her body. She's holding an apple, the same apple Eve held, the symbol of sin and temptation. And when the painting is finished, it won't be titled Portrait of a Child or Eugenia at age 6. It'll be called La Monstrua, the monster. Her name was Eugenia Martinez Vallejo. King Charles II of Spain, a man so inbred his jaw couldn't close and his tongue didn't fit in his mouth, saw her and immediately commissioned 2 life-sized portraits. In one, she appears unclothed. In the other, dressed as Bacchus, the god of wine and gluttony, draped in fabric and grapes like a joke. But here's what art history professors don't mention when they discuss Juan Carreño de Miranda's technique, or Baroque court portraiture. Eugenia wasn't a willing model. She was 6 years old. She had a medical condition that caused insatiable hunger, and the Spanish court fed her unlimited food while calling her a monster for consuming it. Tonight we're dissecting every layer. The portraits that immortalized her suffering, the court that exploited her, the king who collected her, the artist who painted her with exquisite skill while capturing her exploitation in oil and canvas. The medical reality of what her body was experiencing, the daily horror of being 6 years old and displayed like an animal. And the question nobody asked in 1680, what did Eugenia want? Nobody asked. They never asked. This is going to take a while, so settle in deep, because we're not rushing through this one. Madrid, 1680. The Spanish Empire is a corpse pretending to breathe. Still technically, the wealthiest power in Europe. Gold pouring in from American colonies, territories spanning the globe, an empire where the sun never sets. But the wealth flows straight through, paying debts, funding wars, maintaining bureaucracy. The actual Spanish economy collapsing, agriculture failing, industry stagnant, population declining. It's a hollow shell of power, and everyone knows it. The signs are everywhere if you know where to look. Spanish cities that once bustled with industry now have empty workshops. Fields that should be producing crops lie fallow because there aren't enough workers. The plague had swept through decades earlier, taking millions, and the population never recovered. Spanish nobles spend fortunes on elaborate clothing and ceremonies while their estates crumble. They import everything, food, fabric, manufactured goods, because Spanish industry can't compete. The gold and silver from the New World arrives in Seville and immediately leaves again, flowing to England, France, the Netherlands, countries that actually make things. The military is a shadow of what it once was. Spain still has territories across Europe, the Spanish Netherlands, parts of Italy, fortresses scattered across the Mediterranean, but holding them costs more than they generate. Every war is a drain. Every battle reveals how weak the empire has become. And trade? The famous Spanish treasure fleets still sail from the Americas, yes, but increasingly, those ships are attacked by English and Dutch privateers. The routes aren't secure anymore. The naval power that once controlled the Atlantic is rusting in harbour. Madrid itself reflects this decay. The royal palace is magnificent, certainly, but step outside the aristocratic quarters and you'll find poverty. Beggars line the streets, orphans huddle in doorways, disease spreads through crowded neighbourhoods where sanitation is a joke and medical care is reserved for those who can pay. The Spanish Inquisition still operates, still burns heretics, still inspects everyone's faith with paranoid intensity. But even that institution is showing cracks. The auto da fe, the public ceremonies where heretics are burned, used to draw massive crowds. Now people attend out of fear rather than enthusiasm. The religious fervour that once defined Spain is curdling into something darker. Fear, paranoia, the desperate grip of an institution that knows its power is fading. Spanish universities, once centres of learning, are stagnating. While England and France embrace new scientific ideas, Spain clings to medieval scholasticism. The Inquisition suppresses any ideas that contradict church doctrine. Books are burned, thinkers are investigated, innovation is dangerous. And on the throne sits Charles II. They called him El Hechizado, the Bewitched, because surely only a curse could create what he was. Let's be clear about Charles, because understanding him is essential to understanding why a 6-year-old girl would end up painted and displayed like an exotic animal in a royal palace. Charles was born in 1661, the long-awaited male heir to Philip IV. Spain had been waiting, praying, desperately hoping for a prince who could continue the Habsburg dynasty. When Charles was born, there was celebration. Finally, an heir. But the celebrations died quickly, because it became clear, very quickly, that something was deeply wrong. Charles couldn't walk until he was almost 4 years old. He didn't speak clearly until much later. His body was weak, constantly sick. He had seizures. His jaw, that famous Habsburg jaw, protruded so far forward that his upper and lower teeth didn't meet. He couldn't chew food properly, had to have everything mashed or softened. His tongue was too large for his mouth. It made speaking difficult. People who met him reported that he drooled constantly, that his speech was slurred and hard to understand. Royal courtiers learned to interpret what he was trying to say. He was prone to infections, constantly ill with something, fevers, stomach problems, mysterious pains. The royal physicians bled him regularly, thinking that would help. It didn't. They prescribed elaborate medicines made from crushed gems, powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, and other expensive nonsense. Nothing worked. Intellectually, Charles was limited. Some historians suggest he was intellectually disabled. Others argue he was simply poorly educated, constantly ill, and raised in an environment of stifling court protocol that didn't encourage learning. The truth is probably somewhere in between. He could read after a fashion, could write his name in simple phrases, could understand basic concepts, but complex political theory, military strategy, economic policy, far beyond him. His own mother, Mariana of Austria, reportedly said he was unable to govern. She served as regent during his childhood, and even after he came of age, she and various court factions continued to control actual policy, while Charles played the role of king. Physically, Charles was a disaster. Beyond the jaw and the tongue, he had digestive problems, constant stomach issues. He couldn't process food properly, frequently vomited, lost weight easily despite eating rich foods. His body was failing in multiple ways simultaneously. He suffered from what was likely a hormonal disorder. His body was oddly proportioned, thin limbs, swollen abdomen. He had almost no body hair, and crucially, he was almost certainly infertile. Charles married twice, first to Marie-Louise of Orléans, niece of Louis XIV of France. The marriage was political, meant to secure peace with France. Marie-Louise was young, beautiful, and reportedly horrified by her husband. She tried, she really did, but there were no children. After 10 years of marriage, she died suddenly. Possibly poisoned, possibly just illness. No one knows for sure. Charles then married Maria Anna of Palatinate-Neuburg, a German princess. Again, political marriage. Again, desperate hopes for an heir. Again, no children. It became increasingly clear that Charles couldn't produce an heir. The Habsburg line in Spain was ending. This biological reality hung over everything. Spanish courtiers knew they were serving the last Habsburg king. Everyone was already manoeuvring, already preparing for the succession crisis that would inevitably come when Charles died. The War of Spanish Succession, one of the bloodiest conflicts in European history, was already inevitable. Everyone could see it coming, and Charles knew. He understood, in whatever capacity he could understand, that he was failing, that his body was wrong, that he couldn't fulfill the basic duty of a king, produce an heir, the bewitched. That nickname wasn't just about his physical condition. Many Spaniards genuinely believed Charles was cursed, that his body was evidence of supernatural intervention, that someone had cursed the royal family. Black magic, witchcraft, evil, exorcisms were performed on Charles. Multiple times, priests tried to drive out the demons they believed were inhabiting him. They didn't work, obviously, because Charles wasn't possessed. He was the product of 2 centuries of catastrophic inbreeding. And that brings us to the question nobody at court wanted to ask. How did Charles II become what he was? Let's talk about how you create a king whose body doesn't work. Because this is crucial. This is the context that explains everything about the Spanish court's obsession with bodies, with difference, with collecting human oddities. This is why a 6-year-old girl from the mountains would end up standing in a palace room, holding an apple called La Monstrua. The Habsburg dynasty had ruled Spain since 1516, when Charles V inherited the throne. For nearly 200 years, the family had pursued a deliberate policy of intermarriage, keeping power within the family, keeping bloodlines pure, ensuring that Habsburg territories stayed in Habsburg hands. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces. The family tree looked less like a tree and more like a tangle of branches looping back on themselves. Let me give you some specific examples. Charles II's parents were uncle and niece. His father, Philip IV, married Mariana of Austria. Mariana was Philip's niece, his brother's daughter. But it gets worse. Mariana's parents were also related. Her father, Ferdinand III, was from the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs. Her mother, Maria Anna of Spain, was from the Spanish branch. They were cousins. So Charles's mother was already the product of cousin marriage, and then she married her uncle. Charles's family tree, if you map it out, shows that his 8 great-grandparents were only 4 unique individuals. The same people appear multiple times because the family kept marrying each other. Modern geneticists have analysed the Habsburg family tree. They've calculated what's called the coefficient of inbreeding for Charles II. It's higher than the coefficient you'd get if a brother and sister had a child together. Think about that. Charles's parents weren't siblings, but 2 centuries of inbreeding meant that genetically it was as if they were. The consequences were catastrophic. The Habsburg jaw, that distinctive protruding lower jaw, was the result of a recessive gene being expressed over and over because the same genetic material kept circulating within the family. It got worse with each generation, but the jaw was just the visible symptom. The real damage was internal. Immune system problems, hormonal disorders, digestive issues, neurological problems, fertility problems. Charles II was the end result of this genetic catastrophe. His body was trying to function with a genetic blueprint that had been photocopied so many times it was barely readable. And here's the cruel irony. The same family that created Charles through their obsession with pure bloodlines and keeping power within the family was also obsessed with collecting human curiosities. People whose bodies were different, unusual, monstrous. They couldn't see the connection, couldn't recognise that their own king, their own royal family, was the ultimate curiosity, that they'd created their own monster through deliberate policy. So the Spanish court collected dwarfs, collected people with unusual physical features, collected anyone whose body was different, and they displayed them, kept them at court, painted their portraits. It was projection. The entire Habsburg dynasty was a study in genetic abnormality, but they couldn't acknowledge that, couldn't admit that their policy of inbreeding had created generation after generation of sick, weak, dying children. So they pointed at other people, other bodies and said, "Look at the monsters, look at the abnormalities, look at the curiosities," never looking in the mirror. The Spanish court had a long history of keeping court dwarfs. This wasn't unique to Spain. Most European courts did it, but Spain elevated it to an art form. Diego Velázquez, the great Spanish painter of the previous generation, had painted numerous portraits of court dwarfs. These paintings are famous. Some are considered masterpieces, and they're complicated. On one hand, Velázquez painted these individuals with dignity, with personality, with humanity. They're not caricatures, they're portraits of real people with inner lives. On the other hand, these people were still employed primarily as entertainment. Their job was to amuse the royal family, to be different, to be looked at. Some court dwarfs held official positions. They had titles, salaries, apartments in the palace. They ate at the royal table. They were part of the court hierarchy, but they were still there because of their bodies, because they were unusual, because they could be displayed. And it wasn't just dwarfs. The Spanish court also kept people with intellectual disabilities, people with unusual physical features, extra fingers, unusual birthmarks, asymmetrical faces, anyone who deviated from the norm. There was even a tradition of keeping wild men, individuals brought back from Spain's colonies who looked or behaved differently from European norms. Indigenous people from the Americas, Africans, anyone exotic. These people were baptized, given Christian names, dressed in European clothing, and displayed. Proof of Spain's global reach, proof of Spain's power to collect wonders from around the world. The palace had entire rooms dedicated to curiosities, cabinets filled with unusual objects, preserved specimens, objects brought back from distant lands, and among these objects, living people. The line between person and possession was blurry at the Spanish court. You could be a valued member of the household and still be property, still be a thing to be displayed and marvelled at. This was the world that wanted a 6-year-old girl from the mountains. This was the world that would call her La Monstrua. This was the world where being different meant being useful, where bodies that didn't conform became entertainment, where a child with a medical condition would be painted twice and displayed forever. And the man presiding over this world, Charles II, was himself the product of the same logic that created the Curiosity Cabinet. The same obsession with bloodlines and heredity, and the belief that bodies revealed divine will. If you were born different, it meant something. It was a message from God, or from the devil. Your body was a text to be read, interpreted, understood. Charles's body was readable. It said, "This dynasty is cursed. This family's ending. This empire is dying." But nobody wanted to read that message, so they looked at other bodies instead, and tried to read different messages there. Into this world came Eugenia, Barcina, a tiny village in the mountains of northern Spain, in the region of Cantabria, where green peaks rise toward cold skies and villages cling to hillsides. This is where Eugenia was born, around 1674. We don't know the exact date. Peasants didn't keep detailed birth records. The church might have recorded a baptism, but if they did, that record is lost or never survived. We know almost nothing about her family. Her parents' names aren't recorded. We don't know if she had siblings, don't know what her father did for work. Probably farming, like everyone else in Barcina. Don't know if her mother was alive when Eugenia went to Madrid. Nobody asked about her family. Nobody thought it mattered. Barcina was the kind of place where life was hard and short, where most people never travelled more than 20 miles from where they were born, where winter could kill you if the harvest was bad, where children died frequently enough that parents sometimes didn't name them until they were a year old, just in case. The village would have been small. Maybe a few dozen families, everyone knowing everyone. Your business was everyone's business. Your successes and failures discussed by the entire community. And Eugenia's body would have been impossible to hide. Imagine being her parents. You have a daughter. At first she seems normal, maybe a bit chubby, but babies are supposed to be chubby. It's healthy. It means they're eating well. But then she keeps growing, keeps gaining weight at a rate that doesn't make sense, and she's always hungry, always asking for food, always eating. It doesn't matter how much you feed her, she never seems satisfied. Remember, she's 6, just 6 years old. The age when children should be playing, learning, discovering the world. In a peasant household in 17th century Spain, food is scarce. You have what you can grow, what you can trade for, what you can afford. There's never abundance. Most families are one bad harvest away from starvation. And here's your daughter eating portions that would feed 3 children and still hungry. The other villagers notice. Of course they notice. They start whispering, start making comments, start avoiding you at church, start making signs against evil when they pass your house. Because in 17th century Catholic Spain, everything has a spiritual explanation. If your child is different, there's a reason. Either you're being punished for sin, or the devil is involved, or it's a test from God. None of the explanations are good. Maybe the village priest gets involved, comes to your house, examines Eugenia, prays over her, tries to determine if she's possessed or cursed or just different. Maybe he's kind about it, or maybe he suggests that you haven't been pious enough, that this is punishment for some failing, that you need to pray more, confess more, give more to the church. And still Eugenia keeps growing, her body expanding in ways that don't make sense, her face becoming rounder, her limbs thicker. By the time she's 5 or 6, she's enormous. Not just fat, though she is that, but massively, unusually large. She probably weighs more than adult women in the village, more than her own mother certainly. Moving is difficult for her. Running, playing like other children, probably impossible. She tires easily, gets out of breath. The other children might tease her, or they might be frightened of her. Either way, she's isolated, and her parents are desperate. They're feeding her everything they can, and it's never enough. She's always hungry, always begging for more, and they can't afford it. So when someone, a travelling noble, a priest with connections, a royal official passing through, mentions that the court in Madrid is interested in curiosities, interested in unusual people, interested in paying for such things, what do? Do you send your 6-year-old daughter to the royal palace? Do you let her be taken from you, from everything she knows, to be displayed like an animal in a menagerie? Or do you keep her in the village, where food is scarce and people whisper and your family is marked as cursed? It's not a choice. Not really, because poverty removes choice, makes the unthinkable practical, makes the horrific necessary. So Eugenia goes to Madrid. Maybe her parents convince themselves it's an opportunity, that she'll be cared for, that she'll have food, shelter, a place at the royal court, that it's better than the alternative. Or maybe they know exactly what they're doing, know they're selling their daughter into exploitation, and they do it anyway because they have to survive. We don't know. The records don't tell us. Nobody asked what her parents thought. Nobody asked what Eugenia wanted. All we know is that Eugenia left Barcelona, left the mountains, the village, the only home she'd ever known, and travelled to Madrid, a 6-year-old girl, with a body she couldn't control, going to a place where she'd be turned into entertainment, going to a place where they'd call her La Monstrua, the monster. The journey from Barcelona to Madrid is about 250 miles. In 1680, that's a long journey. Days, possibly weeks, depending on how you travel. If you're wealthy, you ride in a carriage. But Eugenia wasn't wealthy. She was likely transported in a wagon. Maybe riding, maybe walking part of the way. Uncomfortable either way. And think about what that journey must have been like for her, 6 years old, leaving everything familiar, travelling through landscapes that get less green and more brown as you move south and inland. Did anyone explain where she was going? Did anyone tell her why? Did she understand that she was being taken to the king? Did that mean anything to her? Probably not. 6-year-olds don't understand court politics or royal curiosity collections or the economics of exploitation. She probably understood only that she was leaving home and didn't know why. Was her mother with her? Her father? Or was she handed over to strangers who transported her like cargo? The records don't say. Another gap in the story. Another place where Eugenia's experience is completely lost to us. Nobody asked if she was scared. Nobody asked if she wanted to go. Nobody asked if she understood what was happening. They never asked. Madrid in 1680 was a city of about 150,000 people, the capital of the Spanish Empire, the seat of royal power, and completely overwhelming if you've spent your entire life in a mountain village. The noise alone would be shocking. Thousands of people, horses and carriages on cobblestone streets, street vendors calling out, churches ringing bells, the constant hum of urban life, the smells. Cities in the 17th century smell terrible. Human waste in the streets, animal waste, garbage, smoke from thousands of cooking fires, the stench of too many people living too close together with no real sanitation. And the palace, the Alcazar of Madrid, where the Spanish kings lived, a massive stone fortress palace overlooking the city, hundreds of rooms, thousands of people living and working there, nobles and servants and guards and priests and everyone else who made up the royal court. For a child from Barcelona, it must have been like landing on another planet. Eugenia was brought to the palace, presented to the king, and Charles II looked at her and saw exactly what he'd been told to see. A wonder, a curiosity, a living marvel, not a frightened 6-year-old who had no idea what was happening. Not a child with a medical condition that caused her uncontrollable hunger and weight gain. Not a person with thoughts and feelings and fears. La monstrua, the monster. And Charles made his decision immediately. He wanted her painted, wanted her immortalized, wanted to preserve this wonder forever. He summoned Juan Carreño de Miranda, the court painter, one of the most skilled artists in Spain, a man who'd painted kings and queens and religious scenes and noble portraits, and Charles told him, paint the monster. Twice, once as she is, and once as Bacchus. Carreño didn't refuse. You didn't refuse the king. Not if you valued your position, your salary, your career, your life. So he agreed, and Eugenia's fate was sealed. But before we get to the paintings themselves, let's talk about what Eugenia's daily life at court must have been like, because that's where the real horror lives. Not in the paintings, those are just the record. The real horror is in the day-to-day reality of being 6 years old and being called La Monstrua every single day. Imagine waking up in the Alcazar. You're 6 years old. You sleep where? The records don't say. Probably not in the royal apartments. Those were reserved for the king, the queen, high nobility. Probably in servants' quarters. Small rooms, shared with others, maybe other curiosities, maybe just servants who resent having to share space with you. The bed is uncomfortable. Not the straw mattress you had in Barcelona, but not comfortable either. The palace is cold. Stone walls, high ceilings, drafty corridors. Even in summer, there's a chill. In winter, it's brutal. You wake up hungry. You're always hungry. That's the constant of your life. The gnawing, endless hunger that never stops. Your stomach feels empty even when it's full. Your brain screams for food even when you've just eaten. She was 6, just 6, and her body was betraying her every moment of every day. Breakfast. If you're lucky, you get to eat with the other court dependents, servants, lower-ranking nobles, other curiosities. There's food, more food than you ever saw in Barcelona. Bread, cheese, maybe fruit. Wine or watered wine because the water isn't safe to drink. You eat quickly, frantically, because that's how your body works. You can't help it. And people watch, they always watch. Sometimes they comment. Sometimes they laugh, Sometimes they just stare. Look how she eats, like a pig. Disgusting. Fascinating. You don't fully understand Spanish court language yet. Your parents spoke Castilian Spanish, but probably a rural dialect. Court Spanish is different, more formal, filled with phrases and protocols you don't know. But you understand tone, you understand laughter, you understand when people are mocking you. After breakfast, what do? You're not educated, no one's teaching you to read or write or do sums. You're not being trained for any useful position. You're not learning a trade, you're just there, to be looked at, to be la monstrua. Maybe you're taken to certain rooms in the palace at certain times. Displayed for visitors, high-ranking nobles come to see the king's wonders. They tour the curiosity rooms. They look at the collected objects, exotic animals stuffed and mounted, unusual artifacts from the colonies, strange natural specimens, and they look at you, standing there, breathing, a living curiosity. They might ask you questions. Where are you from? How old are you? How much can you eat? Sometimes they ask your handlers instead of asking you, talking about you as if you're not there, or as if you can't understand, or as if your answers don't matter. How much does she weigh? Can she walk normally? Is she simple-minded? Does she have parents? And your handlers answer. Someone's been assigned to manage you, to keep track of you, to make sure you're where you need to be when you need to be there. This person isn't kind. They're doing a job. You're part of their duties, like maintaining the king's hunting dogs or managing the stable. Nobody asks if you're cold. Nobody asks if you miss your mother. Nobody asks if you understand why they call you la monstrua. They never ask. Lunch, more food. The court eats multiple times a day, rich, elaborate meals, and you're allowed to eat, encouraged to eat. Because watching you eat is part of the entertainment. The court finds your appetite fascinating, horrifying, amusing. They've never seen anyone eat like you do. They don't understand that you can't help it, that your body is betraying you, that you'd stop if you could. They think you're greedy, gluttonous, that you choose to eat this way, that you're weak-willed or sinful or cursed, and they feed you. Keep feeding you, because the bigger you get, the more remarkable the curiosity, the more valuable the monster. Afternoons are long, boring. You're not allowed to wander the palace freely. You might get lost, you might disturb someone important, you might break something, so you stay in designated areas. Maybe you have other curiosities to talk to, if any of them speak your language and want to be kind. Maybe you don't. Maybe you spend hours sitting, waiting, existing. Sometimes you're summoned. Someone wants to see the monster. You're brought out, displayed, sent back. Like a performer, except you don't perform. You just exist and let people stare. The staring never stops. Everywhere you go, people stare. Servants whisper and point. Nobles look with fascination and disgust. Children gape openly, because no one's taught them not to. You become numb to it. Or maybe you don't. Maybe every stare is a wound. Every whispered comment a cut. Maybe you learn to keep your face blank, neutral, because showing emotion invites more commentary. Evening, more food, another meal where you're watched, where people comment on your appetite, your eating habits, your body. She's gotten bigger. How is that possible? Remarkable, revolting. And then night, back to your uncomfortable bed in your cold room, lying there, still hungry despite eating all day. Your body confused and in pain. Your stomach overfull, but your brain still screaming for more food. You miss your mother. You miss Barcelona. You miss being somewhere where people knew your name instead of calling you La Monstrua, the monster. But you can't go back. There is no going back. This is your life now. And then comes the day when you're told you're going to be painted. Nobody asks if you want to be painted. Nobody explains what it means. Nobody tells you that the image will exist forever. 6 years old, and about to become immortal in the worst possible way. Juan Carreño de Miranda was born in 1614 in Avilés, a coastal town in Asturias, northern Spain. By 1680, He was 66 years old. He'd been court painter to Charles II for years. He'd painted the king multiple times, carefully, diplomatically, minimizing Charles's physical deformities while still maintaining likeness. Carreño was skilled, really skilled. He'd trained under the best artists in Spain. He'd studied the works of Velázquez, whose shoes he essentially filled after Velázquez's death. He knew colour theory, composition, anatomy, light, shadow. He could paint realistic human figures with technical mastery that few could match. He'd painted religious scenes, saints in ecstasy, martyrs at the moment of death, the Virgin Mary crowned in glory. He'd painted mythological scenes, gods and heroes from classical antiquity. He'd painted nobility, dukes and duchesses in their finest clothing, surrounded by symbols of wealth and power. And he'd painted curiosities. This wasn't his first curiosity portrait. Velázquez had established the tradition, and Carreño continued it. He'd painted court dwarves, people with unusual physical features. He knew how to approach these subjects, how to balance documentation with dignity, how to capture physical reality while maintaining artistic elegance. But Eugenia was different. She wasn't an adult dwarf with years of court experience, who understood the game and played their role. She was 6 years old. Did Carreño hesitate when Charles commissioned these portraits? Did he suggest perhaps just one portrait, clothed, would be sufficient? The records don't tell us. All we know is that he accepted the commission. 2 portraits, one showing Eugenia's body completely, one showing her dressed as Bacchus. Nobody asked Carreño if he was comfortable with this. Nobody asked Eugenia if she wanted this. They never asked. Let's be clear about what Carreño knew. He was educated, well-read. He understood classical mythology and Christian theology. He knew what the apple symbolized: original sin, the fall of man, temptation. He knew what Bacchus represented: excess, indulgence, gluttony. He was making deliberate choices. These weren't neutral portraits. They were arguments, theological and moral arguments made in paint. The message was clear. This child's body is the result of sin, is evidence of excess, is a warning about what happens when appetite goes unchecked. Never mind that Eugenia was 6. Never mind that she couldn't control her appetite. Never mind that she had a medical condition. Carreño was painting her as moral lesson. Did he believe this? Did he genuinely think Eugenia's body was evidence of moral failing? Or was he just following orders, painting what the king wanted to see? We don't know. Artists rarely leave records of their inner doubts and ethical struggles, especially when those doubts concern their royal patrons. Nobody asked what Carreño thought. Nobody asked what his conscience told him. What we do know is that Carreño painted Eugenia with the same technical skill he brought to portraits of saints and kings. He didn't mock her or exaggerate her features for comic effect. He painted her honestly, perhaps even sympathetically, in terms of pure technique. But the composition, the symbolism, the choices he made about how to frame her, those tell a different story. The painting that would become known as La Monstrua shows Eugenia standing against a plain, dark background, almost black. No details, no context, no environment. Just darkness and, in front of it, a 6-year-old girl. She appears unclothed, completely. Every detail of her body visible. Her body is massive. Her stomach protrudes significantly. Her thighs are thick. Her arms are heavy. Her breasts are developing early, probably a hormonal consequence of her condition. Everything about her physical form is documented with careful precision. Carreño didn't exaggerate. He didn't need to. He painted exactly what he saw, and what he saw was remarkable enough. Her face is round, her cheeks full, her dark hair is short, practical, and her eyes, dark, serious, look directly at the viewer, directly at Carreño as he painted her, directly at everyone who would ever see this painting. And those eyes, those eyes looking back at you, unflinching, direct, present. In her right hand, held at waist level, she holds an apple, bright red, perfectly rendered, impossible to miss, the apple of Eden, the fruit that Eve ate and offered to Adam, the symbol of original sin, the moment humanity fell from grace. In Christian theology, the apple represents temptation, disobedience, the choice to indulge desire rather than obey God. It's the root of all human suffering, all human mortality, all human sin. And Carreño put that apple in the hand of a 6-year-old child. The symbolism screams. This child's body is the result of giving in to appetite, of indulgence, of the same sin that caused the fall of man. Her flesh is evidence of moral failing made visible. Never mind that she's 6. Never mind that she didn't choose her body. Never mind that the insatiable hunger is biochemical, not moral. The painting makes an argument, and that argument is, this is what sin looks like. The dark background serves multiple purposes. Technically, it makes Eugenia's pale skin stand out. It focuses all attention on her body, which is the point. There are no distractions, no other elements to look at. Just the body and the apple. But symbolically, the darkness suggests other things. The fallen world, the absence of God's grace, the void into which sin leads. Eugenia stands in that darkness, holding the apple, her body illuminated as if by divine light, because that's how Carreño painted it, with light coming from an unclear source, creating highlights and shadows that give her flesh dimension and reality. She's not posed dynamically, she's just standing, facing forward, looking at the viewer. The pose is simple, direct, almost confrontational. And those eyes looking back, still looking, always looking. Carreño could have painted her looking down in shame, or looking away, avoiding the viewer's gaze, or with a vacant expression, suggesting simple-mindedness. He didn't. He painted her looking straight ahead. Her expression is serious, not happy, not sad. Just present, looking back at everyone who looks at her. What was Eugenia thinking while Carreño painted her? While she stood there, in that palace room, with adults studying her body? Nobody asked her. Nobody thought to record what a 6-year-old felt while being turned into art. Did she understand what was happening? Did anyone explain that she'd be standing for hours while the artist worked? Did anyone tell her this image would exist forever? Probably not. She was 6. She probably understood only that she'd been told to stand still, to hold the apple, to not fidget or complain or ask to stop. How many sessions did this take? Painting a life-sized portrait isn't quick work. Even for an experienced artist like Carreño, this would require multiple sessions. Hours and hours of Eugenia standing while he worked. Did she get breaks? Was she allowed to sit? To eat? Of course she'd want to eat. She was always hungry. To use the bathroom? To rest? Or was she expected to stand for as long as the artist needed, because she was la monstrua and curiosities perform? Nobody asked if she was tired. Nobody asked if her feet hurt. Nobody asked if she wanted to stop. They never asked. The painting doesn't tell us. It only shows the result. A 6-year-old girl, standing in darkness, holding an apple, her body on display forever. When the painting was finished, it was displayed in the palace, hung where visitors could see it, where nobles could marvel at it, where people could point and whisper and discuss the monster. And Eugenia, she was still there, still alive, still walking around the palace. Now she wasn't just a living curiosity, she was a curiosity with a portrait, a documented wonder. Her body preserved in oil and canvas, more permanent than her actual flesh would ever be. The paintings would survive. Eugenia wouldn't. Not in any way that mattered. But Carreño wasn't done. Charles had commissioned 2 portraits. The second one would be different. Not just documentation, transformation. And somehow it would be even worse. The second painting is titled La Monstrua Vestida, or sometimes Eugenia Martinez Vallejo, clothed as Bacchus. Same girl, same artist, completely different approach. In this painting, Eugenia is dressed, draped in flowing red fabric that wraps around her body. Not everyday clothing, this is theatrical costume, mythological costume. On her head, a crown of grape leaves and grapes. In her left hand, a bunch of grapes. In her right hand, what appears to be a cup or vessel, possibly for wine. She's dressed as Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, known to the Greeks as Dionysus, the god of grape harvest, winemaking, fertility, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theatre. But in Christian Europe, Bacchus also represented something else: gluttony, drunkenness, excess, uncontrolled appetite, the dangers of giving in to physical desires. Bacchus was one of the few pagan gods who remained culturally relevant in Christian Europe, usually as a negative example, a symbol of what happens when you indulge too much, when you prioritize physical pleasure over spiritual discipline. So Carreño dressed a 6-year-old child as Bacchus, turned her into the literal embodiment of the god of excess. The symbolism is even more explicit than the apple. This child's body, the painting argues, is what happens when appetite rules, when consumption becomes identity, when the physical overwhelms the spiritual. The composition is less stark than the first portrait. The background is still dark, but there are more elements: the flowing fabric, the grapes, the vessel. It's more baroque, more theatrical. Eugenia's pose is slightly different. She's turned a bit, not facing completely forward. The fabric creates folds and shadows that Carreño rendered with obvious skill. The grapes are painted with careful attention. Individual grapes with highlights suggesting their roundness, their juiciness. And again, that face, that gaze and those eyes, looking directly at the viewer. Looking back at you, serious, unflinching, still looking after all these centuries. But here's what's interesting. The costume doesn't hide her body. The fabric is draped in a way that still reveals her form. You can still see her size, her shape. The clothing doesn't conceal, it frames, it contextualizes. This is Bacchus, the painting says. This is what the god of indulgence looks like. This is the physical manifestation of giving in to appetite. The painting is beautiful from a technical standpoint. Carreño's skill is fully on display. The way the fabric flows, the richness of the red colour, expensive pigment, carefully applied, the detail in the grapes and grape leaves, the careful modelling of flesh tones. He painted this with the same care and attention he'd give to a portrait of a saint or a noble. He didn't phone it in. He didn't treat it as lesser work. He brought his full artistic ability to bear, which makes it worse, because he's applying the full weight of artistic tradition and technical mastery to turn a 6-year-old child with a medical condition into a moral cautionary tale. When these paintings were undisplayed, and they were both displayed in the palace, probably near each other, visitors could see them both, could compare them, could appreciate the artistic choices Carreño made. Look, the paintings said, first, the body as it is, evidence of sin, and second, the body transformed into myth, Bacchus made flesh, the god of excess inhabiting a human form. Together, the paintings created a complete argument, a theological and moral position rendered in oil paint. And Eugenia, she had to live with these images, had to know they existed, had to see people viewing them, discussing them, pointing at them, and those eyes still looking back, still asking questions nobody answered. Did she recognize herself? Did she understand what Bacchus was, what the symbolism meant? Or did she just see pictures of herself and feel, what? Confusion? Shame? Nothing? Nobody asked her. Nobody recorded her reaction. Because her reaction didn't matter. She was the subject, not the audience. The object, not the person. She was 6 years old, and she'd just been turned into a cautionary tale about sin and excess. The paintings would survive. Eugenia wouldn't. Let's talk about what was actually happening inside Eugenia's body. because understanding the medical reality makes the exploitation even clearer, makes the cruelty more visceral, makes it impossible to look away. Prader-Willi syndrome, which is the most likely diagnosis for Eugenia based on her symptoms, is a genetic disorder. It's caused by the loss of function of genes on chromosome 15. This happens randomly during fetal development. It's not inherited from parents. It's not caused by anything the parents did or didn't do. It's a random genetic accident. The syndrome affects multiple body systems, but the most visible and life-impacting symptom is hyperphagia, insatiable hunger. In people with Prader-Willi syndrome, the hypothalamus doesn't function correctly. The hypothalamus is the part of the brain that regulates many bodily functions, including appetite and satiety. It's supposed to tell you when you're hungry and when you're full. In Prader-Willi patients, that signal doesn't work. The satiety signal never comes. The brain never gets the message that you've eaten enough, so you feel hungry constantly. No matter how much you eat, you still feel like you're starving. Imagine that. Imagine being 6 years old and feeling the gnawing, painful sensation of hunger every waking moment. Eating a huge meal and still feeling desperately hungry. Your stomach physically full, but your brain screaming that you need more food. It's torture. Constant, unrelenting torture. And it's not a matter of willpower. It's not that people with Prader-Willi syndrome are weak or lacking self-control. Their brains are literally broken in the specific area that controls appetite. They cannot feel full. Today, we manage this condition through strict environmental controls. Locks on all food storage areas. Carefully measured. Portions. Constant supervision. Behavioral therapy to help develop coping mechanisms. And even with all that, it's a daily struggle. In 1680, there was none of that. No understanding of what was happening. No way to manage it. Just a child who was always hungry and a court that gave her unlimited access to rich food. The syndrome has other symptoms too. Low muscle tone, which makes physical activity difficult. Developmental delays, intellectual disability is common, though it varies widely in severity. Behavioural problems, not because of moral failing, but because the brain isn't functioning normally. Physical characteristics include almond-shaped eyes, a narrow forehead, small hands, and feet relative to body size. Eugenia's portraits show some of these features. The obesity caused by the hyperphagia leads to other medical problems. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, breathing problems. The weight on the chest makes breathing difficult, especially when lying down. Joint problems. The skeleton isn't designed to carry that much weight. Sleep apnea, high blood pressure. Children with Prader-Willi syndrome often die young if the condition isn't managed. Their hearts give out. They develop fatal blood clots. They choke on food because they eat so quickly and so much. And the psychological toll is enormous. Imagine being constantly hungry, constantly uncomfortable, your body aching all the time, and everyone around you treating your body as evidence of moral failing, calling you greedy, calling you a glutton, calling you la monstrua, the monster. You can't explain that it's not your fault, that your brain is lying to you about hunger, that you'd stop if you could, because you're 6. You don't have the language or the understanding to articulate what's happening. All you know is that you're hungry and people hate you for it. This was Eugenia's daily reality. Remember, she was 6, just 6 years old. Constant hunger, constant physical discomfort, constant social rejection and mockery, and the court, the same people who called her a monster, were making it worse. They gave her unlimited food. They encouraged her to eat. They watched her eat and marvelled at her appetite. They were feeding a child with a condition that made it impossible for her to regulate her own food intake. They were actively making her sicker, worsening her prognosis, shortening her life, all while calling her gluttonous, all while painting her as the embodiment of the sin of overindulgence. The cruelty is breathtaking when you understand the medical reality. They took a child with a genetic disorder that caused her suffering, They exploited that suffering for entertainment. They worsened her condition deliberately. They moralized about her body. They turned her into a cautionary tale about sin and excess. And they thought they were doing nothing wrong. Thought they were simply documenting a natural wonder. Thought they were collecting curiosities, supporting the arts, maintaining court traditions. They couldn't see the child underneath the condition, couldn't see past the body to the person, couldn't recognize their own role in her suffering. Nobody asked if Eugenia was in pain. Nobody asked if she needed help. Nobody asked if there was a way to make her life easier. They never asked. Eugenia wasn't the only curiosity at the Spanish court. Understanding who else was there helps us grasp the full scope of this system, helps us see that what happened to a 6-year-old girl wasn't an isolated incident. It was policy, it was tradition, it was normal. We know names of some of the dwarves who served at the Spanish court during this period. Sebastián de Mora, a dwarf who'd served at court for decades and had been painted by Velázquez. Francisco Lescano, another court dwarf, also painted by Velázquez, shown in a thoughtful pose with playing cards. These men had official positions. They received salaries. They had living quarters in the palace. In some ways, they were respected members of the court. In other ways, they were performing animals. The line was always blurry. You could be valued and still be property, could be well treated and still be exploited, could have genuine relationships with nobles and still fundamentally be there for entertainment. Some court dwarfs were married, had families. Some accumulated wealth. Some were educated and witty, their intelligence adding to their value as entertainers. But they were still there because of their bodies, because they were different, because they could be looked at. And there were others. We know less about them because they weren't important enough to paint or write about extensively, but court records mention them occasionally. People with intellectual disabilities who were kept at court, sometimes treated with affection, sometimes mocked, always dependent on the whims of their patrons. People with physical deformities, someone with a hunched back, someone with a facial asymmetry, anyone whose body didn't conform to norms. Savage people brought from the colonies, indigenous Americans, Africans, anyone who looked different from Europeans and could be displayed as evidence of Spain's global reach. These people existed in a strange liminal space. Not quite servants. Servants had clearly defined roles and hierarchies. Not quite nobles, obviously not, regardless of any courtesy titles they might be given. Not quite slaves. Spain had slaves, but court curiosities had a different legal status. They were curiosities, things, living objects in the royal collection. Did any of them form relationships with each other? Did the court dwarfs talk to Eugenia? Did anyone try to help a 6-year-old girl understand what was happening? We don't know. The records are silent on these questions. Because the inner lives of curiosities didn't matter to the people documenting court life. But surely there must have been some connection, some solidarity among people who understood what it meant to be looked at constantly, to have your body be your entire identity, to exist for others' entertainment. Maybe one of the older dwarfs tried to give Eugenia advice, tried to teach her how to navigate court life, how to protect yourself emotionally when your body is constantly on display. Or maybe not. Maybe everyone was too concerned with their own survival to reach out. Maybe the hierarchy among curiosities was as brutal as the hierarchy in the rest of the court. Maybe Eugenia was entirely alone, a 6-year-old with no allies, no friends, no one who saw her as anything other than La Monstrua. Nobody asked if she had friends, nobody asked if she was lonely. Nobody asked if anyone was kind to her. They never asked. After the paintings were completed, Eugenia vanishes from historical record. The paintings exist. A few brief mentions in court documents exist, listing her among the king's household. And then, nothing. No death record, no mention of her leaving court, no further paintings or descriptions. She simply disappears from the archive. This could mean several things. Let's explore the possibilities. Because in the absence of evidence, speculation is all we have. And even speculation honours Eugenia more than silence. She probably died young. This is the most likely scenario. Children with severe, unmanaged Prader-Willi syndrome rarely live past childhood. The physical strain is too great. The heart gives out, respiratory failure, diabetic complications, blood clots, choking. If Eugenia died at court, she might have been buried quietly. She wasn't nobility. She wasn't important enough for an elaborate funeral or a recorded death. Just another servant, another dependent, another body disposed of. She might have been buried in a common grave with other court servants, or in a church cemetery with no marker, or simply forgotten. If she died around age 8 or 9, 2 or 3 years after the paintings, that would explain why there are no further records. She simply didn't live long enough to generate more documentation. The court might not have even informed her parents. If they were still alive, if they were still in Barcelona, they might have spent years wondering what happened to their daughter. Or maybe they knew she was dead, but had no way to retrieve her body, no way to mourn properly. Or maybe, at some point, Eugenia stopped being interesting. The novelty wore off. She was no longer novel enough to justify the expense of keeping her at court. So she was sent away, maybe back to Barcelona, dumped on her family with no support. Maybe to a convent. Convents often took in women who had nowhere else to go. Maybe just turned out onto the streets of Madrid. If she was sent away, she would have disappeared from court records because she was no longer part of the court. And without court records, we have no way to track her. A girl from a peasant family, with no money, no connections, no way to support herself. If she ended up on Madrid's streets, she wouldn't have survived long. Or maybe Eugenia lived for years at court. But after the initial excitement of the paintings, no one bothered writing about her anymore. She was just there, part of the background, no longer worth mentioning. She might have lived into her teens or even adulthood. But without generating documentation, no more paintings, no more mentions in letters or diaries. She's invisible to history. This happens. Lots of people lived and died at the Spanish court without leaving traces. If you weren't important enough to generate records, you simply don't exist in the archive. Eugenia might have spent years in the palace, might have watched Charles II decline and die in 1700, might have seen the War of Spanish Succession break out, might have experienced the transition from Habsburg to Bourbon rule. But if no one wrote about her, we'll never know. Nobody asked what happened to her. Nobody thought to record her fate. Nobody cared enough to document when La Monstrua stopped being useful. The paintings survived. Eugenia didn't. Not in any way that mattered. Not in any way that lets us know what happened to a 6-year-old girl who was turned into art and then forgotten. While Eugenia disappeared, her painted images survived. And their journey through history is its own story. A story of how exploitation gets preserved and reinterpreted and displayed across centuries. Initially, the paintings were displayed in the Alcazar of Madrid, hung in rooms where courtiers and visitors could see them, part of the royal collection, evidence of Charles II's wealth and power and ability to collect wonders. When Charles died in 1700, Spain descended into chaos. The War of Spanish Succession raged for over a decade, different factions fighting over who would inherit the Spanish throne, foreign powers invading, the country torn apart. The paintings survived. Somehow, through war and political upheaval, they remained part of the royal collection. In 1734, a massive fire destroyed much of the Alcázar of Madrid. Countless artworks were lost. Velázquez's paintings burned, centuries of collected treasures destroyed. But Carreño's portraits of Eugenia survived. They'd been moved to a different location, or they were carried out during the fire, or they were simply lucky. Either way, they made it through. The Bourbon dynasty, which had taken over from the Habsburgs, built a new royal palace. The paintings were moved there, still part of the collection, still evidence of Spain's artistic heritage, but their meaning was changing. By the mid-18th century, the Enlightenment was in full swing. New ideas about human dignity, about reason, about the proper treatment of people with disabilities and differences. The paintings started to look less like celebrations of royal collecting and more like evidence of a barbaric past, but they were still valued as art, as examples of Carreño's skill, as historical documents. In the 19th century, when the Prado Museum was founded, the paintings were transferred there, made part of Spain's national artistic patrimony, available for public viewing, and those eyes, still looking back, still watching everyone who looked at them. Art historians studied them, wrote about Carreño's technique, discussed the tradition of court curiosities, analysed the symbolism of the apple and Bacchus, but mostly they focused on the artistry, on Carreño's skill as a painter, on the historical context of Habsburg collecting practices. Less attention was paid to Eugenia herself, to what these paintings represented, to the exploitation they documented. Throughout the 20th century, the paintings remained in the Prado, sometimes on display, sometimes in storage, rotating through different exhibitions, part of the permanent collection, but not always visible. Art history textbooks mention them, usually in sections about Spanish Baroque painting or court portraiture. Brief mentions, a paragraph or two, never the focus. And then, in recent decades, something shifted. Disability studies emerged as an academic field. Scholars started asking different questions about historical images of people with disabilities. Suddenly, these paintings weren't just examples of Baroque technique. They were documents of historical ableism, evidence of how people with medical conditions and physical differences have been exploited across centuries. Eugenia's name started appearing more frequently in scholarly work, not just as La Monstrua, but as Eugenia Martínez Vallejo, a person with a name, with a story, with humanity. The Prado started adding more context to the painting's display, explanatory text discussing the ethics of court curiosity collections, acknowledging the exploitation. But the paintings are still there, still on display, still showing Eugenia's body to thousands of visitors every year. And those eyes, still looking back at everyone who looks at her, still asking questions nobody can answer. The painting survived, Eugenia didn't. Not in any way that mattered, not in any way that preserved her voice or her experience or anything about her beyond what the court wanted to preserve. They kept the spectacle. They discarded the person. Let's talk about how we're still doing this, because we are. The forms have changed, the justifications have evolved, but we're still turning people with unusual bodies into spectacles. Reality television is full of shows that exploit people with medical conditions or physical differences. Shows about people with extreme obesity. Shows about little people. Shows about unusual medical conditions. The framing is different now. We call it awareness. We call it celebrating difference. We say these people are sharing their stories and taking control of their narratives. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes people with unusual bodies or medical conditions do choose visibility, do decide to share their experiences, do find empowerment in claiming their own stories. But sometimes it's the same old exploitation with a progressive veneer. When a television producer approaches someone with an unusual medical condition and offers them money to appear on a show, is that really that different from the Spanish court offering Eugenia's parents money, or protection, or opportunity? When millions of people watch that show and comment on the person's body, discuss their eating habits, speculate about their medical condition, is that really different from court nobles viewing Eugenia and discussing her? We tell ourselves it's different because the person consented. But what does consent mean when you're poor, when you need money, when you're offered an opportunity you can't refuse? What does consent mean when you're a child and your parents make the decision for you. Social media has made this even more complicated. Now people can turn themselves into spectacles without needing a producer or a network. You can post pictures and videos of yourself, can build an audience, can monetize your difference. And again, sometimes this is empowering. Sometimes people with disabilities or unusual bodies use social media to challenge stereotypes, to build community, to claim agency over how they're seen. But sometimes people with medical conditions get pressured by family members to perform online, to generate content, to make their body and their condition into entertainment that generates income. And the comments, the staring has moved online. Instead of Spanish courtiers whispering behind fans, we have commenters on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. Some supportive, some cruel, all treating the person's body as public property, as something they have a right to comment on, to analyse, to discuss. The line between visibility and exploitation is blurry. It always has been. But it's especially blurry when the person being looked at has limited agency, either because they're children, or because they're poor, or because they're disabled in ways that affect decision-making. And here's the thing that really gets me. We look at those paintings of Eugenia and think, how barbaric, how cruel, how could they do that to a 6-year-old child? And then we turn on the TV and watch shows that do essentially the same thing. Or we scroll through social media and gawk at people with unusual bodies. We've changed the language. We've changed the justifications. But have we actually changed the behaviour? I'm not sure we have. And you might see yourself in this, standing there, staring, consuming someone else's tragedy, turning a person into a spectacle, just like the Spanish courtiers did, just like everyone who's ever looked at those paintings has done. The difference, the only real difference, is consent. Who has power? Who controls the narrative? Who benefits? When Eugenia was painted, she had no power, no control, no benefit. She was 6 years old and being exploited by adults who saw her as property. When an adult with a disability chooses to share their story, to appear on television, to post on social media, and when they control how they're portrayed, and when they benefit financially and emotionally from that choice, that's different. But when a child with a medical condition is parented by someone who posts constant videos of that child online, who monetizes that content, who builds a brand around their child's disability, how is that different from Eugenia? When a television producer finds someone desperate enough to agree to be filmed, someone who needs money badly enough to allow cameras into their most vulnerable moments, how is that different? These are uncomfortable questions. They should be, because they force us to interrogate our own behaviour, our own consumption, our own complicity. Every time we watch a show about someone with an extreme medical condition, every time we click on a video of someone with an unusual body, every time we scroll past someone's medical trauma and pause to stare, we're participating in the same system that created those paintings of Eugenia. We're not innocent viewers. We're the audience, the demand that creates the supply, the reason these spectacles continue to exist. And you might see yourself in that, standing there, staring, just like I am by telling this story, just like everyone is by listening. I need to talk about what I'm doing right now, because I'm not exempt from this critique. I'm part of the system I'm condemning. This script is about Eugenia. It uses her story. It asks you to think about her body, her exploitation, her suffering, and in doing so, it's making her into content. I'm doing the same thing Carreño did, not with paint, but with words, taking Eugenia's image, her story, and turning it into something that serves my purposes. Yes, my stated purpose is different. I'm trying to honour her, trying to make sure she's remembered as a person, not just a curiosity, trying to use her story to make people think about exploitation and consent and the ethics of display. But I'm still using her, still making her useful, still turning her suffering into something that generates views and engagement. And you're here listening to this because Eugenia's story is compelling, because exploitation is fascinating, because a 6-year-old child being turned into a spectacle makes for good content. That's an uncomfortable truth, but it's true. If I told you a story about a random 6-year-old from 17th century Spain who lived an ordinary life and died and left no trace, you wouldn't listen. That's not interesting. That's not compelling. But a 6-year-old who was turned into a living spectacle, who was painted by a master artist, who represents something larger about human cruelty and the treatment of difference. That's interesting. That's worth your time. So I'm using Eugenia's exploitation to create content, and you're consuming it. And we're both participating in a system that turns human suffering into entertainment. Does it matter that I'm trying to be ethical about it? That I'm acknowledging the exploitation? That I'm trying to center Eugenia's humanity? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the only ethical choice would be to not tell her story at all, to let her rest, to not drag her back into the light for people to look at again. But then she disappears completely. And that feels wrong too, because the painting survived. Eugenia didn't, and letting her be forgotten entirely means the exploitation wins completely. This is the paradox at the heart of historical work about exploitation. You can't talk about exploitation without, in some sense, replicating it. Can't point at the spectacle without creating a new spectacle. Can't honor the exploited without using their stories, their images, their suffering. There's no clean solution, no pure ethical stance. Just choices that feel slightly less bad than other choices. I've chosen to tell Eugenia's story, to use her as an example, to ask you to think about her, to care about her, to recognize what was done to her. But I'm also using her, making her useful to me, making her suffering serve a purpose. And I think it's important to name that, to acknowledge it, to not pretend I'm somehow above the dynamics I'm critiquing. I'm not. None of us are. We're all complicit, all participants in systems that turn people into objects, suffering into content, exploitation into entertainment. Nobody asked if it was okay to keep telling Eugenia's story. Nobody asked if she'd want this. Nobody asked if dragging her back into view again and again serves her or just serves us. They never asked, and we're still not asking. The question isn't how to be innocent. The question is what we do with that complicity, how we navigate it, how we try, even imperfectly, to do less harm. I don't have a perfect answer, just a commitment to trying, to acknowledging Eugenia's humanity, to refusing to let her be reduced to just a curiosity or a cautionary tale. But I'm not going to pretend I'm innocent. I'm not, and neither are you for listening. We're all looking at Eugenia, all using her, all trying to learn something from her suffering. And maybe that's okay, maybe that's the best we can do. Use her story, but use it consciously. Acknowledge what we're doing. Refuse the comfortable lie that we're somehow different from the people who exploited her in the first place. We're not different. We're just 400 years later with slightly better rationalizations. Let's catalogue what's lost, because the gaps in Eugenia's story are as important as what we know. Every gap is a place where nobody asked, a place where nobody cared, a place where a 6-year-old child was erased. We don't know her parents' names, don't know if she had siblings, don't know what her father did for work, or if her mother survived childbirth, or if her family was religious or superstitious or kind or cruel. Nobody asked about her family, nobody thought it mattered. We don't know how Eugenia felt about her body, if she understood she was different, if she had words for the hunger that never stopped, if she hated herself, or just hated the situation, or didn't have the conceptual framework to hate anything, just existed in confusion and pain. Nobody asked what she felt. Nobody thought a 6-year-old's feelings were worth documenting. We don't know if she made any friends at court. if any of the other curiosities tried to help her, if any servants were kind to her, if she had anyone at all who saw her as more than La Monstrua. Nobody asked if she was lonely. Nobody asked if anyone was kind to her. We don't know if she cried when she was taken from Barcina, if she begged to go home, if she asked for her mother, or if she was too young, too confused, too overwhelmed to process what was happening. Nobody asked if she was scared. Nobody asked if she understood. We don't know what language she spoke. Probably Castilian Spanish, but what dialect? With what accent? Did she speak like a peasant from the mountains? Did the court nobles mock her speech? Did she eventually learn courtly language? Or did she remain marked by her origins every time she opened her mouth? Nobody asked what she sounded like. Nobody recorded her words. We don't know if she could read. Probably not. Literacy rates among peasant girls in 17th century Spain were nearly zero, but maybe someone taught her. Maybe she learned letters, learned to write her name, or maybe she never did. And that's another way she was isolated, another form of powerlessness. Nobody asked if she wanted to learn. Nobody thought education mattered for La Monstrua. We don't know what she liked. If she had favourite foods beyond just everything, always, as much as possible. If she liked music or animals or stories. If anything brought her joy. Or if her entire existence was just constant hunger and constant shame. Nobody asked what made her happy. Nobody thought her happiness mattered. We don't know if she understood why people called her a monster, if she internalized that label, if she believed she was monstrous, sinful, wrong, or if some part of her knew it wasn't her fault. Nobody asked what she thought of herself. Nobody asked if the name hurt. We don't know how long she lived, if she died at 8 or 12 or 16 or 20. We don't know how she died. Disease? Heart failure? Choking? Or something else? Nobody recorded when she stopped being useful. Nobody marked when La Monstrua disappeared. We don't know where she's buried, if anyone said prayers over her body, if anyone mourned. Nobody asked where to put her. Nobody thought she deserved a marked grave. We don't know if her parents ever learned what happened to her, if they spent years wondering, if they eventually heard she'd died and grieved, or if they never found out and spent the rest of their lives wondering where their daughter was. Nobody told them. Nobody thought they had a right to know. We don't know if Carreño felt guilty about the paintings, if he thought about Eugenia after she vanished, if he ever looked at those portraits and felt discomfort or regret, or if he just moved on to the next commission, the next patron, the next subject. Nobody asked if he regretted it. Nobody thought his conscience mattered. We don't know if Charles II ever thought about Eugenia as a person, if he cared that she disappeared, if he noticed when she wasn't at court anymore, or if she was just one curiosity among many, easily replaced. Nobody asked what the king thought. But then, nobody ever asked what the 6-year-old child thought either. We don't know how Eugenia felt when she stood for those paintings, if she was scared or bored or numb, if she understood what was being created, if she had opinions about the apple or the costume or the way Carreño directed her to stand. Nobody asked what she thought while she was being turned into art. Nobody asked if she wanted to be immortal. They never asked. All of this is lost, gone, irretrievable. We have the paintings, but we don't have the person. We have the body, but we don't have the inner life. We have the spectacle, but we don't have the experience. And that's the tragedy. Not just that Eugenia was exploited, but that the exploitation erased her so completely that all we have left is the evidence of that exploitation. The painting survived. Eugenia didn't. Not in any way that mattered. Not in any way that preserved who she actually was. Everything else about her, everything that made her human, that made her a person, that made her more than just a body, is gone. Let's come back to those eyes, because they're the only part of the paintings that suggests interiority, that hints at the person behind the body, that refuses to let us look comfortably. In both portraits, Eugenia looks directly at the viewer. Her gaze is level, unflinching, serious. And those eyes, looking back at you. Always looking, still looking after 400 years. Carreño could have painted her, looking down, looking away, looking vacant or empty. He chose not to. He painted her, looking at us, meeting our gaze, forcing us to acknowledge that we're looking at her. What does that gaze mean? What was Carreño trying to capture? One interpretation. He's showing us that Eugenia is present, aware, not an empty vessel or a mindless body. She's there, behind those eyes. She's looking back at us. Another interpretation. The direct gaze is confrontational, challenging. She's not playing the role, not performing the monster. She's just standing there, enduring, and making us complicit in that endurance by meeting our gaze. A third interpretation. The gaze is neutral. Carreño was just painting what he saw. Eugenia looked at him while he painted, so he painted her looking. No deeper meaning, just documentation. I don't know which interpretation is correct. Maybe all of them. Maybe none of them. What I do know is that the gaze makes these paintings harder to look at, easier to look away from, more uncomfortable. You can't just stare at Eugenia's body without acknowledging that she's staring back, that she sees you, that she's a subject, not just an object, and those eyes still watching, still looking back at everyone who looks at her, still asking questions nobody answered then, and nobody can answer now. And maybe that's why these paintings have endured, not just because of Carreño's technical skill, but because there's something in that gaze that won't let you look away comfortably. That won't let you reduce Eugenia to just a curiosity. Those eyes insist on her humanity, on her presence, on her personhood. And maybe that was Carreño's one mercy, one acknowledgement of the wrong he was participating in. He couldn't refuse the commission, couldn't protect Eugenia, couldn't stop the exploitation, but he could paint her eyes, could capture that direct gaze, could create images that refuse to let viewers forget they're looking at a person. It's not enough. It doesn't undo the harm, doesn't give Eugenia back her agency, or her dignity, or her childhood. But it's something. A small resistance within complicity, a tiny acknowledgement of humanity within exploitation. Those eyes have outlived everyone involved in their creation. Carreño is dead. Charles II is dead. The nobles who viewed these paintings in the palace are dead. The system that exploited Eugenia is gone. But the eyes remain. And those eyes, still looking at us, still looking back, still asking questions we can't quite answer, still reminding us that a 6-year-old girl was here, was real, was human. So how do we remember Eugenia? How do we tell her story without exploiting her again? How do we honour her without turning her into a symbol, or a cautionary tale, or a useful example? I'm not sure we can. Not perfectly, but maybe we can try to do less harm. Try to keep her humanity at the centre. Try to remember her as a person, not just a body. Eugenia Martinez Vallejo was a child. She was 6 years old when those paintings were made. Just 6. That's kindergarten age. That's learning to tie shoes and write your name age. That's believing in magic and fairy tales age. She came from Barcena, a village in the mountains. She had parents whose names we don't know. She might have had siblings. She definitely had hopes and fears and experiences that we'll never know about. She had a medical condition that caused her body to develop in unusual ways. That condition caused her suffering, constant hunger, physical pain, social isolation. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't punishment for sin or evidence of moral failing. It was genetics, biology, random chance. She was brought to Madrid, to the Spanish court, where she was displayed as a curiosity, where people called her La Monstrua, the monster, where she was painted twice by a master artist, where those paintings turned her into an eternal spectacle. She disappeared from historical record after 1680. She probably died young, She's probably buried somewhere without a marker, without a memorial, without anyone remembering where. But she existed. She was real. She mattered. Not because she was unusual, not because she was a curiosity, not because she became useful to historians or disability scholars or people like me writing scripts about exploitation. She mattered because she was a person, because every person matters, because existence itself is valuable, regardless of whether that existence is documented or remembered or useful to anyone else. Eugenia deserved better. She deserved medical care we couldn't have given her in 1680, but could absolutely give a child with her condition today. She deserved compassion instead of mockery. She deserved to be treated as a child instead of as a spectacle. She deserved to be called by her name instead of being called La Monstrua. She didn't get any of that, and we can't undo that. Can't go back and save her. Can't rewrite history to give her the childhood she deserved. All we can do is remember her rightly. Remember her as Eugenia. Remember that she was exploited. Remember that exploitation is wrong. Was wrong in 1680, is wrong now. The painting survived. Eugenia didn't. Not in any way that mattered. Not in any way that preserved her voice or her choices or her inner life. And maybe try to do better. Try to treat people with unusual bodies with dignity. Try to recognize when we're turning people into spectacles. Try to resist the impulse to stare, to comment, to make other people's bodies into our entertainment. That's not much. It doesn't help Eugenia. She's beyond help, beyond reach, beyond any intervention we could make. But maybe it helps the living. Maybe remembering Eugenia, remembering her humanity, remembering what was done to her, helps us see the people around us more clearly. Helps us recognize exploitation when it's happening now, in forms we might otherwise rationalize or ignore. Maybe that's the best we can do. Use Eugenia's story to change how we see the world, to become more conscious of power, of consent, of who gets to control narratives about bodies and difference. Not because Eugenia would have wanted that. We don't know what she would have wanted. Nobody asked. But because it's the only way to make her suffering mean something, to refuse to let it be pointless. She suffered. She was exploited. She disappeared. Those are facts we can't change, but we can refuse to look away, can refuse to let her be forgotten, can refuse to let her exploitation be normalized or rationalized or explained away, can insist across 400 years that what happened to her was wrong, that she mattered, that she still matters. That's not justice. Justice isn't possible, but it's memory, and memory is important. So here we are, at the end of Eugenia's story. Except it's not really her story, is it? It's the story of what was done to her. Her real story, her thoughts, her feelings, her experiences, her voice, is lost. Completely, irretrievably. All we have are those paintings, those images of her body that have outlived her by centuries, that show her standing in darkness, holding an apple, draped as Bacchus, and those eyes, looking directly at everyone who looks at her. The paintings were meant to preserve her, to make her permanent, to ensure she'd be remembered, and they succeeded. Eugenia is preserved, is remembered. Her face looks out from museum walls, from art history books, from screens like the one you're watching right now. But only the parts they cared about, the body, the spectacle, the curiosity, everything else about her, the person she was, the life she might have lived, the thoughts she had while standing for those portraits, all of that is gone. They preserved the shell and let the person inside disappear. The painting survived. Eugenia didn't. Eugenia Martinez Vallejo wasn't a monster. She was a child, a little girl with a medical condition in an era that understood nothing about medicine and everything about cruelty. She deserved better. She deserved care and compassion and dignity. She deserved to be more than a spectacle. She deserved to be called by her name instead of being called La Monstrua. She didn't get any of that. And 400 years later, Thousands of people walk past those paintings every year. Most don't even pause, just another portrait in a museum full of portraits. Just another face from another era. But if you stop, if you really look, if you meet those dark, serious eyes that stare out from the canvas, you might see something that makes you uncomfortable. You might recognize something familiar. You might see yourself standing there, staring, consuming someone else's tragedy, turning a person into a spectacle. And you might wonder, just for a moment, if we're really that different from the Spanish court in 1680. If our venues have changed, but our impulses haven't. If we've learned anything at all. I don't have an answer. All I have is Eugenia's face, looking back at me from across 4 centuries, and those eyes, still looking, always looking, asking a question I can't quite hear, but I think the question is this: when will we stop turning people into monsters? When will we see bodies as belonging to people, not to spectators? When will we recognize that difference is an entertainment? Maybe never. Maybe this is just what humans do. Maybe the impulse to stare, to categorize, to turn the unusual into spectacle is too fundamental to overcome. Or maybe we can do better. Maybe we can look at those paintings and let them make us uncomfortable. Let that discomfort change us. Let Eugenia's suffering, and our complicity in continuing to look at her, push us to treat living people with more dignity. Maybe that's the best we can do. Not undo the past, not save Eugenia, but use her story, use her image, use our discomfort to become slightly less cruel, slightly more conscious, slightly more human. It's not enough, it's never enough, but it's something. Remember her name, Eugenia Martinez Vallejo. Not La Monstra, Eugenia. She was 6 years old, just 6. Remember that she was a child. Remember that she suffered. Remember that what happened to her was wrong. Remember that the painting survived. Remember that Eugenia didn't. And maybe, when you see someone with an unusual body, someone who looks different, someone who draws stares, maybe you'll remember Eugenia. Remember what it means to be turned into a spectacle, and maybe you'll look away, or look differently, or look with compassion instead of curiosity. That's all we can do. Remember, and try to do better. Remember that she was 6. Remember her name. If you made it through this, leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. Had you seen those paintings before? Did you know Eugenia's name? This was a heavy one. I know, some stories are, some truths don't come easy. If you want more stories about people history tried to erase, about the cost of being different in eras that demanded conformity, about the uncomfortable truths hiding in museums and history books, I'll be here. There are more stories, so many more. Try to rest tonight. Though I know stories like this one make rest difficult, they should. Some truths demand we stay awake with them for a while. Eugenia Martinez Vallejo wasn't a monster. She was a child who deserved better. Remember her name.